Shalom and welcome to a new live stream from Israel for Fred. MIF is the largest pro-Israel membership group in Europe that is non-religious, non-partisan, and we are working around the clock these days to cover events in Israel and Gaza in Norwegian, Swedish and Danish and Icelandic as well. But this interview will be in English. I'm pleased now to be joined by Matti Friedman. Matti, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, how are you? And what's the situation there today?
Well, I'm in Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been quite quiet. We've had rocket fire, but not as much as other places in Israel. My own family is okay. But we're surrounded by people who are grieving, like most people in Israel. The son of good friends of mine was at the music festival in the south and was badly wounded. He lost an arm and then was abducted by Hamas. The son of neighbors was killed at the same festival. My kids know, people who've died, and we're in the middle of an event that's really unprecedented. I mean, people are comparing it to the Yom Kippur War, but the Yom Kippur War, of course, involved soldiers, and this event, this tragedy, mainly involves civilians. We're talking about, according to the army this morning, I was speaking to an army rep, and the numbers as of now are 1,200 civilians, and 306 soldiers, and then another 199 hostages, but they're still finding bodies, so the numbers might change. But we're in an event that we've never seen before.
It's terrible. And how do you think the international media is covering this so far?
The first week or so was refreshing to me because the crimes were so obvious and because they were so well documented, ironically, by the terrorists themselves. The coverage was quite sympathetic. I mean, there was really no other way to cover it. But I knew, I've been, as you know, I was in the foreign press for a long time and I've covered it for a long time. That the shift will come as soon as Israel begins responding, then the coverage moves inside Gaza, and the cause of the violence is forgotten or made to disappear. And instead, you have a story about Israel attacking Gaza. And the reasons why this is happening become very hard to understand. And so I knew that would happen. And we seem to have seen it happen over the past maybe 4 or 5 days. The story has moved inside Gaza. And the Hamas supporters in the international press, of whom, unfortunately, there are many, are doing their best to reverse the cause and effect of the war. So they're trying to come up with some event that makes it seem that Israel is the aggressor, some event that's heinous enough to erase the massacre of October 7th. And we just saw an attempt yesterday with the story that came out of Gaza about the hospital that was supposedly bombed by Israel. And that was going to be the story that would change the dynamic and rally the liberal world against Israel.
The Norwegian media was full of these news on Tuesday night, and then on Wednesday, when they realized that it was Islamic Jihad that sent the missile that exploded, then they have quickly covered the whole story. Now they're not interested in how many died. They're not interested in what happened. It's a non-story right away.
Yes, it was a terrible tragedy that killed 500 people until it turned out that Israel didn't do it, at which point it just didn't happen. And apparently the hospital is still standing. And it's not to say that it wasn't a tragedy or that there won't be real tragedies. And it's very possible that our military will make mistakes. That is almost certain to happen. And there will be real stories of civilian tragedy in Gaza. But I think we have to understand that much of the international press, not all of it, but much of the international press operates as a kind of political lobby. They're going to try to shift the story as much as possible against Israel. And they're going to do it using events like this in the hopes that people will forget that, on October 6th, there were no Israeli soldiers inside Gaza and no Israeli airplanes attacking Gaza. And Hamas, which is the ruling party in Gaza and a movement that enjoys broad support in Palestinian society, they made a decision. And the decision was to enter Israel and slaughter civilians in a kind of massacre that it reminds us of medieval times. It reminds us of the darkest times in human history. And I won't repeat the crimes because I think everyone knows them by now. And I'd rather not think about them. But the worst things you can imagine. I mean, imagine the worst thing you can think of. And that happened multiple times on October 7th. And that was a decision that they made. And that's very uncomfortable for people who would, like to portray Israelis as aggressors and Palestinians as kind of innocent, organic olive farmers. You're going to see the press try to deal with that resonance over the next days and weeks.
So for several years, you worked with the news agency Associated Press. So after the massacre of 7th of October, did any of your former colleague reach out to you to express sympathy or?
No, I kind of made myself unwelcome at the AP by writing some very critical exposés of what the coverage looked like. Other people who've left the AP over the years reached out. I guess I should say that a colleague of mine at the AP, an Israeli cameraman who filmed for the AP from the south of Israel for many years. He lived near the Gaza Strip and was a cameraman. He was murdered with his entire family in Kfar Aza, in one of the kibbutzim near the Gaza Strip. So, things are very close to us. But the news organizations at the moment are doing what they usually do, which is more or less conform with the Hamas script about how to cover anything that happens in Gaza, which means that they accept at face value the claims of the Gaza Health Ministry, which is Hamas. And that's the explanation for what happened yesterday. There was an absolutely ludicrous claim that Israel had just bombed a hospital and that immediately Hamas knew that 500 people had been killed. It took Israel, we're still counting the bodies from October 7th. And yet Hamas knew within, 2 or 3 minutes, the precise death toll in the hospital. But so clearly that story needed to be treated with more suspicion, but it suits the pre-existing biases of the press. So of course it went out and was believed by millions of people around the world.
Yeah. One of the most prominent Norwegian journalists covering Israel and the Middle East, he was reading the messages from Hamas health government direct live on air in the largest newscast on Tuesday night.
I mean that says it all. The Gaza Health Ministry, as it's usually called, is of course an organ of Hamas. And those statistics are often, the death toll statistics are laundered through the press by pretending that they're not coming from Hamas. But of course, Hamas has no interest in telling you how many of its fighters are dead, and they'll make it seem that everyone is a civilian. And cameramen in Gaza are allowed to film civilian death, but not military death. So this has been going on for 15 years. The first round of serious violence against Hamas in Gaza was December 2008. So any journalists who are still, believing the kind of propaganda coming out of Gaza, it's no longer possible to claim that this is an innocent error. This is policy, and the criticism that they're getting is well deserved.
Thanks for joining us on this live stream. We are talking live with Matti Friedman from Jerusalem. And if you as a viewer have any question or comments that you want to put to Matti, please type them in the comments. So I was talking to I'm talking to several Israelis these days, and everyone is saying this is going to be a long war, not weeks but maybe months. What is your reading of the situation going forward?
I'm afraid that's probably true. Israel has realized, maybe belatedly, that we can't leave Hamas in place in Gaza, and there's been an attempt over many years, maybe over the past 15 years, to fight Hamas when necessary, but to leave them in charge of Gaza because the price of eradicating them would be too high, because it's actually good to have someone in charge in Gaza, and because we told ourselves that they could be deterred. They would, fire rockets on occasion, but we can handle it. And that was preferable to sending the army into Gaza, which is going to be very difficult and costly. And what we learned on October 7th is that we were wrong about that. that you can't leave them in place, and that something very dramatic and painful is going to be necessary, and that's what we're going to see. It won't be short. It can't be short. It might well be accompanied by violence coming from the northern border. There is a potential for an even wider conflict. Of course, we have the Iranians in the background, and we have American forces now moving into the region. So, we're at a very perilous moment. And whatever happens over the next weeks, I hope it's as painless as possible, not just for us, but for our neighbors. But because of what we saw on October 7th, I think what we're likely to see is something prolonged and quite ugly.
Yeah. You live in a city with about 40% Arabs, and you know them as friends and neighbors. How do you read the reaction in the Arab street of Jerusalem?
It's hard to know. I don't really have an intimate glimpse of what people are thinking. People here, Jews and Arabs, actually do their best, generally speaking, to keep normal life going, to keep the economic life of the city going. And I've seen this in past rounds of violence. At the moment, the city feels quite dead. The streets are much emptier than usual. At night, the streets are almost completely empty. So people are going to work, but there's not a lot of mixing in the shared spaces of Jerusalem, and people are generally staying close to home. There have been one or two violent incidents in Jerusalem, but generally speaking, the city has been quiet, and I hope it stays that way. Although if this goes to a broader war, what you said is true. We have a large Arab population here in Jerusalem. Generally speaking, relations are okay. But when the last time the Palestinian elections were held, which was 2006, Palestinians in Jerusalem voted for Hamas. That party won the vote. So it's not that there's no Hamas supporters in this city, and let's hope that ideology remains theoretical and is not put into practice.
Yeah. If you had to lead an editorial meeting of a Norwegian newspaper or TV radio station today, what would be the news stories that you would ask your journalists to cover?
I think that we need more coverage of Hamas in Gaza, not Hamas's image as it tries to create, in the press, but actually what it looks like, what the military infrastructure in Gaza looks like, what Hamas's control of Gaza's civilians looks like, what Hamas's relations with Iran are like. The actor in this story is Hamas. The Western press is obsessed with Israelis and Jews. So the coverage is dedicated to analyzing Israeli actions and reactions, when in fact the decisions here are being made by Hamas. Hamas is the side that decided to go to war on October 7th with a slaughter of civilians. Hamas is the actor who decided what the battlefield in Gaza will look like. So we need Western reporters to stop being so interested in Israel, I think, and start paying attention more to terror organizations like Hamas, who really shaped reality for Israelis and Palestinians over the past 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. One viewer says, I think now the Hamas has crossed a border. Israel has to remove the terror from the West Bank and Gaza. And he's saying that the leaders of Hamas are in Qatar. And he says, remove them. And so the question is probably, is there a way for Israel through any means to also reach Hamas leaders in Qatar?
It's true, the political leadership of Hamas sits in Qatar and apparently live quite well compared to the people in Gaza. The military commanders are inside Gaza. The problem with Qatar is that it's a country in the U.S. orbit with American military installations. So any Israeli leader considering action against Hamas leaders in Qatar would have to think many times. And there are also kind of under the table relations between Israel and Qatar that come to the surface on occasion. So I doubt you'll see any kind of operation against those leaders. But I think what the viewer said is true, and Israelis from the right to the left understand that it's true. Hamas has to be removed. It can't be allowed to sit on our southern border and threaten, to repeat the kind of thing that we saw on October 7th. And leaving it in place until now was clearly an error, and it's an error that we're now going to have to fix at great cost.
Mm. How do you yourself cope in this terrible situation? I mean, you are an author, you are a journalist. Have you put all your other projects on hold to follow the news, or what? How is life in that way?
Yes, for now, I am working on a book, but it seems very theoretical. It's a book about something that happened in 1944. So current events have kind of taken over for now, and I'm trying to do some writing. I'm trying to speak to our friends like you, and try to speak to a broader audience that's confused about what's going on. Trying to keep the family going, like that's taking quite a bit of effort. I have 4 kids, and some of them have 2 16-year-olds, 1 12-year-old, and 1 7-year-old, and we have to explain to them what's going on. I had to take the big ones to a funeral. There's a lot going on here that requires our attention. So yes, the longer projects are on hold. I hope not for too long.
Matti, thanks a lot for joining us.
Conrad, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all of the great work that you're doing in Norway and Scandinavia. It was such a
I want to show you a photo before you go.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, maybe it's not opening. I have to describe it. On Sunday, we had 1,000 people gathered outside the parliament in Oslo in support of you guys.
Amazing.
Miff made a support rally together with 12 other organizations, and thousands also joined on social media. We stay with you. We stand with you, and we wish you success. I'm Israel-Hamas.
Thank you. That means a lot. Your support means a lot. Sometimes it must seem like we're very far away, but for Israelis, this is very, very meaningful, and I personally appreciate it very, very much. So we're hoping for good news soon.
Yeah. All the best. Bye bye.